happening now, a major escalation in President Trump's trade war with Mexico and Canada.
For over a century, Canada and the United States had one of the most dependable trading partnerships on the planet. Trucks crossed the border on a regular basis. Commodities moved smoothly between industries and ports, and economic prosperity on both sides was inextricably linked. Nearly 75% of what Canada exported went directly to American purchasers. It was more than simply business. It was about comfort, habit, and predictability. But all of it is being ripped apart in real time. In a shocking and purposeful shift, Canada has begun to distance itself from its greatest trade partner, following a $214 billion merger that sent shockwaves through global markets. It isn't because Canada wants to walk away. It's because Washington imposed its will. What triggered the event? A fresh round of tariffs under President Donald Trump's revived trade war agenda. This time, it isn't simply steel, not only aluminum. It applies to all industries, including automobiles and energy. The Canadian response was not one of quiet. It was not begging. It was a chilly tactic. Within months, Canada began diverting trade channels, revising investment treaties, and signing agreements with countries well outside North America. From Indonesia to India, Tokyo to Berlin, a new global network is being built, with the United States conspicuously absent. What is happening right now isn't just a trade dispute. It is an economic divorce, one that might shift the balance of power for decades. Because when your best consumer loses faith in you, they don't simply quit buying, they construct something better without you. And this is precisely what Canada is doing. The disintegration did not occur overnight. However, by early 2025, the indicators were too clear to ignore. President Donald Trump returned to the White House with a fresh commitment to put America first by changing the rules of global commerce. And Canada, long seen as a silent ally, finds itself suddenly in the sights. The first blow came in March, when the White House imposed a 25% tax on all Canadian steel and aluminum. This was not just a continuation of earlier policies. It was a doubling down, with direct ramifications for companies, supply networks, and pricing. But it did not end there. Within weeks, Trump's government escalated the offensive. A planned 25% tariff on Canadian autos and auto components sparked immediate alarm in the auto sector. Suddenly, Canadian-made autos were no longer competitive on American lots. Then followed the energy strike, which imposed a 10% charge on Canadian oil and gas exports. For many in Canada's oil sector, it was the last straw. These were not normal policy changes. They were warning bullets, each one more terrible than the previous. Unlike previous clashes that resulted in negotiations, the tone this time was different. Trump was not encouraging discussion. He was sketching battle lines. During his 2025 visit to Washington, Prime Minister Mark Carney made news for what he said on camera, rather than what he said privately. The old relationship with the United States is over, he stated, giving a clear message that Canada would no longer accept a losing game. What followed was not indignation, but planning. Canadian businesses began pivoting, contracts were destroyed, new alliances were discussed. The decades-long belief that the United States will always be Canada's anchor was formally debunked. In its place, a new doctrine: economic independence out of need, diversity by design. Once the tariffs went into effect, Canadian firms were forced to choose between bearing the costs and risking bankruptcy, or cutting connections with the United States entirely. Many did not wait for the following strike. They responded quickly and decisively. In British Columbia, a large pharmaceutical company began negotiating export agreements with Southeast Asian purchasers, abandoning its typical U.S. customers, not out of spite, but for survival. "We can't keep gambling in a market this volatile," one official reportedly stated. Others saw an even steeper downturn. A costume maker reduced prices to clear inventory before new tariffs made it hard to sell. Label pack printing, which had previously relied heavily on American clients for revenue, made the difficult decision to fully reduce its exposure in the United States. Their logic was straightforward. A 50% tariff would wipe them out in a single quarter. In Montreal, a steel component supplier informed its U.S. customers that costs were set to double, then followed through. Unpredictability was a buzzword in boardrooms and industrial floors. Not in a recession, not a competition. It's just uncertainty. Because uncertainty is toxic for firms that rely on tight margins and long-term contracts. This was no longer about politics, it was about mathematics. And the math did not work. Companies began redrawing their roadmaps. They ceased extending their activities in the United States. They halted efforts aiming at cross-border integration. They increasingly looked overseas, including Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. For the first time in modern history, Canadian firms stopped treating the United States as their default market. They regarded it as a risk zone, and once that view became entrenched, it set off a chain reaction over which Washington had little control, even if it tried. While Washington increased trade tensions, Ottawa quietly executed a masterstroke. Instead of retaliating with more tariffs or heated language, Canada took a far more successful approach. It pivoted, and it did it with accuracy, speed, and scale. This strategy was built on a daring $214 billion shift, anchored by a comprehensive Indo-Pacific plan that is now redrawing the global trade map. In late 2024, Canada reached a significant economic pact with Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous country, and a G20 heavyweight. The agreement reduced more than 90% of tariffs on Indonesian commodities entering Canada and created direct investment possibilities in important minerals such as nickel and bauxite, resources required for electric vehicles, batteries, and future technology. But Indonesia was only the beginning. Canada's Indo-Pacific Plan, backed by a $2.3 billion federal program, aimed to reach 40 nations and 4 billion people. It was more than a trade effort. It was a long-term investment in economic variety. While the United States was withdrawing from trade agreements and threatening allies, Canada was building the groundwork: secure contracts, treaty-backed safeguards, and government-supported entry points into new markets. Foreign direct investment reacted promptly. By the end of 2023, FDI in Canada had surpassed $50 billion, a 9% rise year-on-year. Meanwhile, the United States witnessed a 28% decrease as investors were concerned about volatility and political turmoil. Canadian Trade Minister Marie-Agnes stated it simply: "We're creating predictability, not as a slogan, but as a strategy." As Washington constructed walls, Ottawa created bridges. What was the result? Canada positioned itself not as America's alternative, but as the world's new dependable partner. In the deepest economic upheaval in a generation, Canada is not simply reacting, but leading. The world is taking notice. While Canada moved forward, the U.S. economy began to suffer the effects of its own approach. Tariffs designed to defend American industry were suddenly ricocheting back with terrible intensity. From agricultural communities to manufacturing floors, the consequences were difficult to ignore. Auto sector executives in Michigan and Missouri sounded the alarm. Trump's 25% tax on imported Canadian automobiles and parts threatens to drive up the cost of each car by thousands of dollars. Ferrari prematurely raised prices in the United States by 10%. Honda began contemplating a $15 billion electric car investment in Ontario, citing American uncertainty rather than Canadian rules. Even Foxconn, the Taiwanese tech behemoth formerly courted by U.S. governors, informed investors that it was diversifying away from the U.S. Farmers also suffered. Canada's stealth retaliation measures targeted U.S. goods such as whiskey, oranges, and soybeans. Distributors in places such as Florida and Kentucky were unexpectedly locked out of markets they had served for decades. Steel wholesalers in Pennsylvania, who had previously profited from protectionist measures, were suddenly feeling the pinch. Canadian sources were gone. Prices had risen. Clients were fleeing for European and Asian alternatives. Even American customers were not spared. Grocery costs increased. Gas prices increased. What about those once affordable automobiles from Ontario? Their sticker pricing has become less affordable. Meanwhile, Canadian corporations reduced operations in Chicago, Buffalo, and Detroit, transferring offices to Berlin, Jakarta, and Dubai. The message was clear. Trust had been shattered, and business was going on. Trump's tariffs did not merely target foreign suppliers. They backfired on American consumers, employees, and families. In an effort to safeguard the economy, Washington ended up weakening it, and Canada took advantage of the opportunity to change the rules. In a global economy driven by trust, stability, and long-term vision, Canada has emerged as an unexpected leader. What began as a defensive response to U.S. tariffs swiftly morphed into a strategic repositioning. With a $214 billion shift toward Asia and beyond, Canada not only gained new clients, but also a new identity. While Washington doubled down on isolation and short-term shock tactics, Ottawa quietly established a resilient barrier. Through planned diplomacy and smart partnerships, Canada established itself as the dependable partner the world sorely required. The benefits are already visible: more foreign investment, flourishing commercial deals, and expanding worldwide esteem. For the first time in centuries, Canada is more than merely the United States' junior partner. It is a sovereign actor remaking the world order on its own terms. So when future historians record the moment North American commerce was reinvented, they will point to a choice rather than a fight. Canada chose bridges over fences. Stability outweighs volatility. In doing so, it may have become a covert global commerce powerhouse,